All right, so I know we are still waiting on a couple people to trickle in, but for the sake of time, I think we are going to go ahead and get started today. So, welcome everyone. You are now joining us for the 72nd Japan America Student Conference Symposium. We are so honored to have so many of you join us live, online, whether that be in this Zoom meeting itself or on the YouTube live stream. So before we get started with the actual programming, I want to go over the schedule and a couple of logistical items to keep in mind during today's symposium event. So to start off, my name is Celinda Chang. I am a member of the American Executive Committee for the 72nd JASC. I'm joined today by my 7 fellow American Executive Committee members, 8 Japanese Executive Committee members, and our lovely 44 delegates of the 72nd Japan America Student Conference. This year we have 17 American delegates, or Amadelis, and 27 Japanese delegates, or Japadelis. This symposium falls on day 10 of 11 of our online portion of the conference. You will be hearing more about that shortly, as well as our future plans, because today is not the end for JASC 72. So I'm going to be sharing my screen, and you should now be viewing a picture of the symposium schedule. So we are currently in the open export. As you can see, I will soon be passing it over to our chair of the JASC Executive Committee for some opening remarks. Then we will have each of our 7 roundtables give their presentations. So each roundtable has 20 minutes allocated to them, and that 20 minutes encompasses both the video presentation, which we will be streaming to you, as well as the live Q&A session. And that live Q&A session, the participants in this Zoom meeting are able to participate, but unfortunately not those of you joining us on YouTube live. So please keep in mind that the time for Q&A will vary with each roundtable. And because we do have limited time, while it is unfortunate, please keep in mind that you might not have the opportunity to ask your question. And we do apologize for that, but I know many roundtables have prepared something like Google Forms or some kind of contact information for you to be able to submit your questions, and they'll get back to you after the fact. So the way that the Q&A is going to work for those of you joining us here today on Zoom, when you have a question, you're going to send a direct Zoom chat message. So if you go to the bottom of your screen and click on that Zoom chat right there, you will be sending your messages directly to our lovely vice chair of the American Executive Committee. She's raising her hand. I don't know if you can see, but her name is Madeline Wiltsey. So when you're choosing who to send your question to, her name should be listed as Environment EC _ Madeline Wiltsey. So please send the questions that you have to the RTs and delegates directly to her. And when it comes to question and answer time, she will call on you, and you will be able to ask the delegates your question yourself, but she will be calling on you to do so. So we are starting in our first section with 3 roundtables: culture and identity, health and society, and hard power and individuals. And after that, we will be moving into a 15-minute break. At that point, we'll be asking those of you joining us on YouTube Live to hop onto the link for part 2. So if you might have noticed, but there are 3 separate links for the 3 separate portions of Symposium today. So that link is in the description for this YouTube channel page right now. So find it there. If you can't find it, just do a quick search in YouTube itself for JASC Symposium, and it should pop up all 3 parts there. During that 15-minute break, while we will not be streaming on YouTube, those of you who are deciding to stick around can view a lovely slideshow that one of our AECs, Scooter, has lovingly prepared for us today. You may also turn off your video and mute your audio if you do want to take that break. After that, we'll be moving into our second session for our roundtables about threat and cyberspace and media and democracy. Then our second break will be commencing, and it will be the same as the first break, in which we'll ask you to switch YouTube live links to part 3, and we'll be watching slideshows again. So then we will close with our environment and development and labor and work culture roundtables before hearing some closing remarks from our chair of the American Executive Committee. So I know we're all very excited to get the programming started, and we'd just like to thank you so much again for your continued support of this year's conference, JASC as a whole, and the future of US-Japan relations. So without further ado, I'd like to pass the floor to the chair of the American Executive Committee, Hayato Kimura.
Thank you, Salenda, for your kind introduction. Good morning for those of you in Japan. Good evening for those of you in the States. As introduced, my name is Hayato Kimura, currently serving as the Japanese Executive Chair for the 72nd Japan-America Student Conference. I would like to first take this opportunity to show my greatest gratitude to the sponsors of the 72nd Japan-America Student Conference who have made this conference truly possible, as well as our many guest speakers, panelists, and everyone who took part in this summer online conference, including you delegates. I'd also like to thank our alumni community who have been in continuous support of our conference this year. And finally, the international student conferences, as well as the International Education Center, who never gave up on us and have continued to support us in such a challenging year. The conference would have never been able to take this form to continue the legacy if it wasn't for the generous support of all of you. The theme for the 72nd Japan-America Student Conference is Endeavors for Peace, Take from the Past, Give to the Future. Unlike any other conferences in the past, this year's conference made the attempt to construct the conference in an online format and considering new aspects of the conference while taking from the past, JASC, to continue its legacy. Today in this symposium, you will hear from the delegates on how they have discussed amongst the roundtables. Before we move on to hearing from them, I would like to introduce the themes we have covered in this summer conference to guide you through what we, JASC 72, have discussed in the past 9 days. Starting from day one. Day one was consisted of the opening ceremony as well as the icebreakers and self-introductions of the delegates. In addition to the above, we had held an activity, RT Mixers, in which we set time for 2 to 3 roundtables to discuss together on their intersections and the association with the theme. In day two, we had 2 main activities. The U.S. Institute of Peace Walk Through History activity with Mr. Paul Lee, in which we chose 7 most important historical events of the bilateral relationship, and followed by the first Fukushima panel session with Mr. Hirohisa Kuwata from the Fukushima Minyu Shimbun and the head of Michinoiki Naraha, Mr. Noboru Suzuki. The theme of the following day, second day, was the Second World War and the decision-making during this time. On this day, the delegates were distributed into 2 themes, the decision-making regarding the atomic bomb and the decision-making regarding the Potsdam Declaration. To think in the shoes of the decision makers during the time and discuss with one another taking the form of a debate. As the conference held on the 75th anniversary since the end of the Second World War, the activity had followed our theme, Take from the Past, by thinking in the perspectives of the people at the time and considering possible explanations to it. With the support of Professor Okiyoshi Takeda, we took the time to learn about and discuss on the history, present, and the future of the Asian Americans on day 4. By discussing on possible lesson plans for various stages of education, we not only took the time to learn more in depth about the history and present-day issues concerning Asian Americans in the United States, but also considered how we can take this forward to the future. As a conference held this year, it is without doubt inevitable to consider the effects of COVID-19. With the support from Professor Shizuka Shie, the delegates took time to think how crisis can affect vulnerable populations and implemented the findings to discuss how this applies in the context of COVID-19. 2020 was also an imperative year for the United States. On day 6, JASC 72 considered the themes social justice, race, and ethnicity. Taking the privilege of being a part of JASC, a safe community to discuss on your thoughts, the delegates took time this day to freely communicate on their thoughts regarding social justice, race, and ethnicity, following a panel discussion held by delegates and guests. Day 7 was consisted of 2 themes, election and LGBTQ+ community. As we expect the US presidential election this autumn, we took this day to discuss on this topic on the first half of the day. The theme was then followed by a panel discussion on a small group conversation regarding LGBTQ community. On August 15, the day in which marks the 75th year since the end of the Second World War, the participants once again put thoughts into the theme of World War II by learning from video materials and taking time for a moment of silence at noon Japan time, as well as discussing on the theme peace. During this day, we also came back to the theme regarding Fukushima, this time from a public perspective. Just yesterday, we concluded the conference program days by touching on the theme regarding soft power and the issue regarding cultural appropriation. As you can see, in this year's summer conference, though held online, we have learned on and discussed deeply on the various imperative topics that we have today. As the conference goes, there were 3 questions that I constantly had in mind, in which I would like to take this opportunity to share and have you consider with me, as this would lead you into considering the significance of this year's conference. Number 1, what is peace? Simple enough, yet complicated enough and difficult to answer. As this year's theme illustrates, this was a significant focus in this year's conference, and in which I think is relevant and essential to ask ourselves this year in the 75th year after the World War II. Number 2, what are the differences between the experiences online and offline? As this year's summer conference was held online, this was a question frequently asked amongst ourselves, yet is relevant to all ends of our society today post-COVID-19. The third question being, what consists the JASC experience and what meaning does it hold today? Yesterday, I had a delegate call me asking this simple question. It's simple, but it's essential. The value of an organization is always challenged and strengthened at the same time during a state of a crisis. Therefore, I feel it is crucial for us to reconsider this question on this opportunity. These questions are yet to be answered, but again, I would like you to take this opportunity to consider these, discuss these, to take from the past and give to the future, regardless of our position. I thank you again for taking the time to attend to the 72nd JASC Japan America Student Conference Online Symposium, and hope you enjoy the symposium. Thank you.
With that, we will begin the videos, starting with our first RT.
Can you make sure that you can hear the sound?
We cannot hear the sound.
Hello, everyone. The Culture and Identity Roundtable would like to present the types of privilege that exist in Japan, the United States, and in military organizations. I am Chihiro, and these are my group members, Ririko and Tsuyoshi from the Japan side, and Sachi, Chelsea, and Michael from the American side. Before we start, I would like to make a disclaimer. This presentation is done for the sole purpose of presenting the ideas that came up during the culture and identity RT discussions. Therefore, we ask you to challenge the ideas that were brought up in the presentation, but not the person.
In beginning our presentation, I would like to pose a question. What do you think about when you hear of the word privilege? Mr. Black and Mr. Stone tells us it is 1, a particular advantage for limited people, 2, something granted to someone not as a result of a hard work, which means 3, it can be used to benefit its owners and exclude others, but also 4, it is hard to recognize what you have actually works as a privilege, as it is usually one of the elements you take for granted.
By understanding privilege, you can gain a sense of knowledge about your social status. In doing so, you'd recognize unprivileged people in your society. Through this process, you'd develop a better understanding of the social or cultural structure that you live in. However, one thing you should notice is that privilege is not an absolute or objective one. Rather, it is often defined in terms of the relative relations with others. Therefore, it might be risky or impossible to determine a universal definition of privilege. So from now, we're going to discuss how privilege is different in Japan and the US.
We have been discussing in our group what kinds of elements can shape our identity, and for Japan this was language, while for America this was phrase. I will first explain language privilege. Referring to the dictionary meaning, privilege here is regarded as something most people in the same social group don't have. So for the native Japanese people, it is privileged to be fluent in languages other than Japanese. For example, English, Chinese, Spanish, and others. But for foreign people living in Japan, it is privileged to be fluent in Japanese. So this is actually difficult to compare because of its difference in its meanings. While native Japanese people can gain advantage on being able to communicate with people from abroad, foreign people have the need to interact with the Japanese in order to get necessary information. Therefore, for analysis, we concluded it is actually nearly impossible to generalize the definition of the word privilege, even in a relatively homogeneous country like Japan.
As for privilege in America, our roundtable thought that race may be the most important aspect. As can be seen in the graph, according to Pew Research Center, Americans generally think being white is an advantage in society, while about half or more say being Black or Hispanic hurts people's ability to get ahead. Known as white privilege, this form of privilege influences other important aspects of privilege, including but not limited to education level, income, housing, and health. One reason race is considered a privilege in America is because of its history. Systemic discrimination had been a part of American culture since its inception, as can be seen in the history of enslavement. Additionally, prior to the civil rights movement in the 1960s, it was legal in many areas to discriminate and segregate between white people and people of color. The effects of such systemic differences linger today in the form of income, education, living location, etc., as well as people's perceptions. However, we have been seeing changes over the past 60 years, implying that white privilege may eventually be replaced by another form of privilege.
So far, we've summarized what privileges are, but next we would like to introduce privileges in the military of Japan and the United States. This is because we thought that an unusual process of forming privileges might occur under special circumstances.
Women's empowerment within the military is important to push. Serving in the U.S. military from the Revolutionary War to the present, servicewomen have proved to be an essential asset to national defense and peacekeeping at home and abroad. Acting as 14% of the U.S. military, servicewomen deserve equal standing with their servicemen peers.
However, there are still some issues in the Japanese and American military. As for the Japanese Self-Defense Forces, women generally tend to be promoted later than men because it's necessary to leave the workplace due to marriage or childbirth. Therefore, due to the peculiarities of missions, there is no choice but to choose whether the job or childcare in order to play an active role in the self-defense forces. In addition, there is still a problem for women to be able to carry out the tasks that the men have been carrying out until now. The Japanese and the US military have officially announced that they have opened up all their jobs to women, but there are still physically high standards to enter the unit, and we don't have enough facilities and know-how for women. Finally, this is not an institutional issue, but a matter of personal emotion. It seems that there are still many people in the self-defense forces who oppose female commanders. I guess it's common for male subordinates to make ill of female officers.
The largest challenges we have within the US military to reaching equality are sexual assault/harassment, lack of sufficient representation, and blatant sexism. Whether we look at the Lackland, Texas Air Force Base scandal, where military training instructors assaulted and harassed at least 49 servicewomen, the recent abuse and death of Vanessa Guillen, or the 3% increase in sexual assault cases within the US military from 2018 to 2019, which was reported to affect women disproportionately, it is clear that sexual abuse of women is a large barrier to equality within the US military. Many servicewomen tend to hold administrative positions in the military rather than combat or STEM roles, leading to a clear lack of representation. This gap can be a product of two items. First, it was until recently that certain combat positions within the US military were barred to women. Up until President Obama's administration, women had been excluded from some frontline combat positions officially. For example, special operations and law enforcement positions see a lack of female recruits, such as diving in the US Navy or the military police in the Air Force. The lack of representation within special operations and law enforcement may discourage a woman from participating or entering the programs. Second, women tend to serve in less combat-oriented branches of the military, such as the Air Force or the Navy, which offer more combat positions. For example, the Air Force is colloquially referred to as the chair force due to its more desk-type labor. The U.S. Army, and especially the Marines, contain much less servicewomen. Though there are equal opportunity programs that are pushed heavily to promote gender equality within the military, integration programs cannot change the mindsets of those in the military. These mindsets could be attributed to sexism within the military that deems women as less capable than their male counterparts. Hostile sexism, which shows itself as crude humor and discriminatory slurs, is rampant among servicemen. Benevolent sexism, where sexism is masked as positive actions, often portraying women as needy individuals unable to support themselves, is also an issue. This sexism itself contributes to the lack of representation and sexual assault of servicewomen. As long as sexism in all forms is a part of military culture, it contributes to the denigration and discrimination against women that so heavily weighs on our servicewomen. It is through our research and opinion that male privilege is intertwined with military culture. Though the values of gender equality have spread amongst the military in recent years, gender inequality is a very real issue amongst contemporary military services.
In order to hear the opinions of other JASCers, we conducted a survey that asked them about the keywords they think of when they think about privilege. As can be seen from the graph, there are many people that think wealth and education level is important. Looking more closely at the results, education level was the most important aspect in Japan, and language came in second. For the American side, wealth has the most people and race comes next.
From the poll we took, we found that some kinds of privilege are more obvious, therefore more popular. We also found that more noticeable aspects of privilege may also be the results of others. Regarding our individual research, we found that perceptions of privilege tend to be fluid and that privilege differs based on environmental factors such as the nation, industry, etc. Thank you for listening. The floor is open for Q&A.
This brings us to our first question and answer session. If anyone has questions for the Culture and Identity RT, please direct message me so that I may call on you. And we will be doing Q&A session for this RT until 7:40 p.m. EDT, 8:40 a.m. JST. Diasan, did you want to ask your question out loud?
Sorry. Okay. Thank you for your great presentation. So I have one question. So bonobos are type of primates make groups with females at the top, while humans tend to make group with males at the top. Why do you think so happen the difference?
I suppose I can try to answer the question. While I'm unsure of exact reasons, I have heard that there were cultures in the past and in other areas that did among humans that also had females at the top. These are from some books that I've read in the past, but I vaguely remember that it was mentioned that areas where hunting was seen as a more primary food source tended to construct societies with males at the top, whereas areas where they didn't have to rely on hunting as much did not. This may have considering how many of the cultures that grew to become more strong in current times did originate from civilizations that heavily relied on hunting. This may be a reason why, but as I mentioned at the beginning, I'm not sure about the exact reason. Thank you for the question.
Yes, thank you for everything.
So I see that Mr. Shimamoto, you had your hand raised before. Did you want to ask a question? Yes, you may go ahead. Sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I have two questions. The first one is to the Japanese presentations on the language issue concerning the privilege of the foreigners and the native Japanese. It is a comparison done only in the field of the languages. Now, the US side have touched the racial issue much more on the broader scale. Have you done the comparison on the broader scale other than the language? That is my first question to the Japanese delegates. The second one goes to the both sides, which is you well have touched upon the gender issue, which is notably one of the current topics of the world now. But again, you have constrained the field into the military, which is a very special institution, as you know. So can I ask for the reason why you picked up this very special institution as the study for the gender issue? Those are my questions. from any one of you, if you may.
I would like to answer your first question.
Yes, yes, please.
For the reason why we chose language instead of racial issues in Japan was because we did not have enough time to do extensive research on it. And we believe that racial issues in Japan are not that, it's not controversial, but it's not that significant compared to the United States. So we wanted to present something that is really different in Japan.
Do you think so? Really? About the foreign laborers being treated in a very bad situation. You hear that in the news very often, do you? Don't you? Or the Asians against the Caucasians. What are our perceptions?
Do you mean like in Japan?
In Japan, yes. It's becoming greater now. It's a serious problem.
Yes, I believe that is. I would do like extensive research on it so that we can present it on the final forum.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I would expect that. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, can I add something? Sorry for interrupting.
Oh, yeah, sure.
So for the first question, we will be discussing a lot of different aspects that shapes our identity or culture, and of course, like, we've been discussing like race and like ethnicity, language, nationality, privilege, something. So like we have been discussing a lot of aspects. And like relatively speaking, Japan is like a mono-ethnic and monolinguistic society in Japan. So we consider it's not So we consider the considering what aspects is most likely to affect our privilege or considered to be privileged in Japan, we consider that language has a lot of, affects our identity rather than race. And in the United States, on the other hand, race has a lot of influence on their like privilege and like social status. So I think that's the reason why we chose language rather than race in terms of the privilege in Japan. I hope it can be like answer to your question. And for the second question, why we focus on like military, it's really seems to be like minor section. But actually,
I don't call it a minor section, but it's a unique, very unique, special institution.
Sorry, yes, yeah, it's really unique. And so actually our RT, we have a member of that's Yoshi. Yoshi is actually military academic student, and he's very passionate about the problem of the gender inequality in the military institution. So that's why our group really discussing the problem of the gender inequality in the military groups. And then that's why we, maybe it's really unique, but we just wanted to focus on the problem for our, as our RT.
Okay.
Yes, I hope it can answer to your question, but thank you for your question.
Not at all. Only the one thing I could perhaps note you a little bit, because this is very important. I think you used the word, the Japanese is a mono-ethnic nation. Did you use the word mono-ethnic? Which is, I think, you got to have a little reservation, in using that word, because you'll have to look into the social strata and the kinds of laborers that we have been relying on. The Japanese economy has been relying on a lot on the Asian laborers. And the issue is very, very great. And it relates with the theme of privilege too. So And the perception-wise, don't use mono-ethnic as a word, as a coined word, because we will have to be much more diverse in the thinking. Well, that is idealistically speaking, but yes. Okay, thank you. I understand. Thank you for the answer. Yes.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I wish we could continue more, but we will have to move on in for the sake of time. As Michael just put a comment in the chat that if you have any further questions, anybody who wasn't able to get to, you can go to that Google form and submit, and they will try to get back as well. And with that, we'll move on to the next RT. Thank you all so much.
Hello, everyone, and thank you again for coming to our symposium event. My name is Audrey Bell from Colby College, and this is the Health and Society Roundtable presentation. In our discussions, we talked a lot about the definition of health and the different facets of health. Next slide, please. At the beginning of the conference, each of us created an image to represent how we viewed health, and through discussion of real-world applications, some of our thoughts changed. So some of us also created an image to represent our thoughts on health at the end of the conference. In this presentation, we will go through these images and the process by which they changed or not in order to demonstrate how differently every one of us views health. My initial image of health was this diagram of a car. In my view, the different facets of health represent the different parts of the car. So I said things like physical health is the outside of the car, mental health is the engine, and spiritual health is like the gasoline. In my mind, if any part broke or started malfunctioning, then you could take it to the mechanic or the doctor to fix it. After I presented this image, I was interested that one of my delegate friends said it was a very quote-unquote Western-style model because my image treated each part separately and only went in for maintenance when it is broken. Next slide, please. I think the difference here is tied to the difference in the American and Japanese healthcare systems, which I compare. According to OECD statistics, Japanese citizens go to the doctor much more often, nearly 13 times per year, than their American counterparts, who average around 4 visits per year. In my experience growing up in the States, you go to the doctor only when you need to fix a serious problem, so the healthcare system is very solution-oriented. In our discussion, we talked a lot about the idea that in Japan, healthcare is more focused on preventative care, which explains the more frequent visits for smaller problems. We also talked about the idea of holistic care. In my car analogy, every aspect of health is very separate, and you would go in to fix only one type of issue at a time. In our discussion, we proposed that each part of health is impacted by every other factor, so poor health in one category could be detrimental overall. The idea of preventative care and a holistic approach was very interesting to me. Next slide, please. Because of these discussions, I changed my image of health to a different style on this new slide. Now I imagine health as a Venn diagram, with no part more important than another part. Instead, there are the parts of health that are on the exterior, like your body, and your relationships, and your interior health like your mental and emotional health. Spiritual health, instead of being a factor itself, acts as an overlap between the two categories. Spiritual health creates the motivation necessary to maintain a good health overall. I like this better than my car image because it introduces the idea of maintenance as something you can do yourself to a certain extent. I think this new view reflects the discussions we have had about our different views of health and how our views were influenced by our own countries. And now, thank you, and I'll turn it over to Matsumoto.
Hello everyone, I'm Akihiro Matsumoto from Gunma University School of Medicine. This is my image of health. I think our health is like a house. The house has 4 pillars: mental, physical, social, and spiritual well-beings. If we have healthy conditions, the house is stable. However, one pillar falls down. Next slide, please. Every pillar falls down and the house must be broken. The broken house shows the condition that we are unhealthy or we have disease. We have to treat all factors even if the condition looks caused by one factor. Next slide, please. The spiritual health is the most difficult thing to define, and every delegate has different definitions. Therefore, we discussed about spiritual health. First of all, we discussed what is spiritual health. The answer is, of course, we had and have different definitions. But minimum things we agree is spiritual health is the motivation of our life. The second question is, how do religions affect to spiritual health? The believing religions is one of the way to keep spiritual well-being. Believing religion give us the meaning of life. The final question is spiritual health necessary for healthy life? We didn't come to agree. Some delegates think spiritual health is must-have to a healthy life, like my metaphor, and the others think spiritual health is nice-have. Next, please. The base image of health is not changed. On the other hand, through the discussion, my detail of spiritual health is changed. Before discussion, I think spiritual health is passion for the daily life. After discussion, I thought spiritual health is wider. Spiritual health is passion for the daily life, and we can feel the self-love or okay to live. Religion gives us the feelings easily. Okay, next second, please.
Okay, thank you, Matsumoto. Hi, I'm Ryo Sakiyama. I'm from Osaka University, and my major is behavioral economics. In Japanese, Kodo Keizaigaku. I am studying economic models that take into account emotions that have not been defined in economics so far. I believe that when completed, it will be possible to predict people's behavior with higher accuracy. Okay, let's go my first health model. My first model is a little bit ideal. I think the spiritual that is faith and to stipulate our behavior truly are separated completely from other ones. That considers the spiritual to be absolute. So in my definition, health is just by only subject. For example, if the brain floating in the test tube, which can define your own behavior and think I am healthy, she or he is healthy. But the human looks healthy but think I am unhealthy, so he is not healthy. Please next. When we talk about suicides, we have to change my definition. We discuss suicide in 3 types. First is mental disorder. This strong emotion sometimes leads to suicide. Examples include regret and sadness. But even euphemia sometimes leads to suicide. Second is too strong spirituals. This type is rare in reality. These strong spirituals sometimes beat fundamental will to live. For example, planned suicide and part of self-sacrifice for nation. The reason I'm part of it is because I didn't think that the vast majority of people really wanted to sacrifice themselves during the war. Of course, I think there were few. Third is conflict between social and spiritual. This is a common type in recent years, when there is a great difference between the one that society wants and the one that one wants. People are confused and sometimes lead to suicide. Please next. After various discussions, my definition of health was forced to change because my model is too ideal in reality. So this is a second realistic model of health definition. In this model, mental and physical exist as spiritual continents. It is not appropriate to completely ignore these activities as we live in the brain and body. Interactions between spiritual and them have both positive and negative impact. But still important to us is spiritual, because it is what truly defines our behavior, and only one thinks that remains in utopia. However, we tend to consider that the mental and physical to be visible and perspective as important. When they go too far, they become attachment and correlate with spiritual. I think this is one of the suffering of modern people, and the desire to be someone may come from this. My part is over. Thank you.
Thank you, Sakiyama. Hello, my name is Marina Hamada from Keio University, Japan. So this is the little picture of my definition of health. For me, having a minimum level of physical health is the most important. Physical health is the baseline of making other components of health like mental or social health, because if we are severely injured or sick, we cannot go to the school and it is hard to feel happy. Mental health, however, is the most important factor for human happiness and is closely linked to social health. For example, if we are mentally healthy, our relationships goes well, and when we have a good relationships, then our mental becomes stable and happy too. My definition of health didn't change that much after the discussions, but for the spiritual health, initially I thought that spiritual health is optional and not everyone needs it. But through we discussed, I came to think that spiritual health is something that we all have by nature, and it becomes visible and crucial when other components of health are in danger. The most obvious way is having a religion, but it's not limited to. It can play as a compass of one's life. That is, when one has a problem, it will guide you which way you should take. That gives a person confidence and probably a joy too. Having a good state of spiritual health enriches one's life, giving them mindful moments, which enables them to support other components of health as well. Going to the next slides. Because we are the Health Roundtable, of course, we talk about COVID-19 as well. There was this article saying that the suicide rate in April in Japan dropped about 20% from the previous year, but is expected to rise because of the loss of jobs and the increasing risk of domestic violence and child abuse. It was really interesting to discuss that some people are feeling disconnected and isolated from society in this stay-at-home period, or stressed about housework, while other people feel less stressed about the relationships between co-workers and overworking and have a better mental health situations. It was also interesting to me that those who would commit suicide now take comfort in the fact that there are adults like themselves. As our lifestyle have changed by COVID-19 and will probably continue to change, I hope to continue the discussion on COVID-19 and its relation to mental health. Now I'd like to pass on to Akiko to talk about her definition of health.
Thank you for Marina. I'm Akiko Sato, and this is I'm from Ikushi University. This is the initial image of health, and I believe the relationship of health has hierarchy like Maslow one, and children, especially infants, cannot choose their family. It means children are influenced directly by social health, like family law, such as Muslim family. So I believed social health includes spiritual health. But after awakening of self-awareness, state of gap or harmony between social health and spiritual health affects on mental health, I believe. Next slide. And this is our RT discussion topic, and then working condition, overwork versus 3 days weekend. 3-day weekend has positive impact on mental health or flexible childcare or productivity. Then 3 days weekend system has only advantages for the company and employee win-win relationship. Then why few company take into the system? Click it. Yeah, this is the answer. Overwork negatively affects mental health when there is no harmony between spiritual health and social health. Level 3, look at Matsumoto. Even though he does not sleep well instead of doing JASC activity all day, but he is in harmony state between them, so his mental health is so good. Next slide, please. So after discussion, my relationship of health was not changed so much, but my definition of spiritual health was changed into broader concept, having the idea of health for me. And in the conclusion, next slide. And it's our wonderful health and society RT discussion. For winter conference, we would like to continue considering COVID-19 situation and etc. If you have any question, please let us know. Thank you very much for coming and listening. Have a healthy day.
This brings us to our next question and answer session. Same as before, send questions in the chat, please, to me. Gio, I see you have a question.
Thank you, Madeline. So first, thank you, Health Roundtable, for your presentation. And I have one question. I think the healthcare system and the medical system comparing with Japan and the United States is very different. So I think regarding the notion or concept of health, both delegates had different kind of opinions. So my question is, what kind of differences were you able to see throughout the discussion regarding the notion of health or other issues regarding health? Thank you.
Hi, I guess I'll take this one since my part of the presentation is sort of about that. Again, I'm Audrey from Colby College. I would say in general, we were interested because the Japanese and American healthcare systems are so different. It has sort of instilled different views of health in the societies that we're from. So the example I used in the presentation is, when do you feel it necessary to go to the doctor? In Japan, it seems like you go to the doctor a lot more often, according to some statistics and from some testimony from my Roundtable delegate friends. And so then from an American view, that almost seems unnecessary, but it really just depends on where you grew up and how it's all related to itself. In America, healthcare is so tied up in economic problems that it creates a very different view. So those are some of the differences that we noticed while we were talking.
Yes, and also I think it's based on the style what we think to the style of the health. It's based on Western as a Western medicine. I mean, style health is just a treat a part of the body or something. But from the Western, from the Eastern medicine side, the health is a system. So that is maybe differences about that, because we in Japan we go to the hospital very frequently. It's to keep or maintain the system of that. But in America, just broken some part and want to treat, so they go to the hospital. It's maybe differences, and also based on insurance system, and also based on the concept of the health, I think. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Unfortunately, that's the only amount of time that we have for the health RT, but if you have any further questions, you're welcome to message in the chatter message the members, and they can try to answer. Yes, thank you. So Marina has put in the chat a Google form, same as with the Culture RT. And just a very quick note before we go on to the next RT, you are always welcome to start sending your messages during the presentation in a private message to me. And with that, we will move on to the next RT.
Good afternoon, everyone. We are Hot Power and an Individuals RT. We have Anna, Katsura, Junya, Tomoya, Siyuma, and me, Yui, as presenters. Okay, so for the introduction, we as a Hot Power and an Individuals RT first thinking about what the hard power is, and here is our definition. Hard power is an enforcement of the power related to economy, policy, and so on, and it has been influential to individuals. This shows this power is related to all individuals' activity, and we divide activities in different four perspectives: political, economical, historical, and cultural. In our presentation, we will focus on the topic of national bases in Japan to see how hard power has been influential to individuals and how there's a difference in the comprehension in the bases in Japan. So we're going to start from the political aspect of hard power in national bases in Japan.
First of all, we must understand that the fundamental purpose of Japan and the US is the establishment of international security order in Asia-Pacific region, where China proceeded with the policy of expansion and started to realize the establishment of influence. It's impossible for Japan to survive in the midst of disputes in East Asia alone without taking one side, China or America. And it's unimaginable for Japan to become China's ally. In order to restrain China's naval forces activities in the East and South China Sea, Okinawa is playing crucial roles as a forward operation base. As you all can see on this map, Senkaku Islands, where the disputes between Japan and China take place, is quite far from Japan's mainland, but close to Taiwan and China. If America withdrew from Okinawa, it will mean that they abandoned the established influence all over East Asia and lost intention of encountering China in Asia-Pacific, which is why this idea is improbable. National security policy can hardly take any shape by listening to the voice of local residents alone. However, without a profound comprehension on their emotions, it will be extremely hard to carry out a functional, sustaining national security policy. I'd like to end my part with this quote by Margaret Thatcher. There is no such thing as society. There are individual men and women, and there are families. No government can do anything except through people, and people must look to themselves first.
I'd like to talk about traditional aspect in Japan. First of all, I'll talk about historical background. Japan lost all of hard power as a defeated nation after World War II. Then, Japan was ruled by the HQ, and they pushed democratization and demilitarization of Japan. Also, more bases to be placed in Japan under traditional security. Traditional security means security that focuses on how to respond to military threats to a country using hard power, mainly military force. Especially, the base burden has been concentrated in Okinawa. Next, the impact of the base placement includes following. From macro perspective, Japan's economy has recovered. From micro perspective, individuals have been at risk of basement. Therefore, as a conclusion, we can say that the placement of US military bases has led to a significant economic revival, and many people have benefited from the wealth of society. On the other hand, the problems caused by the placement have had and continue to have serious effects for individuals.
Then I will explain the economic aspect of hard power.
First, we regard hard power as something like compelling power. Then what is economic compelling power? Here, I define it as forcing other subjects to do something by the power of money, in a broad sense. Related to the United States-based problem in Japan, I came up with the following example. The relationship between the Japanese government and Okinawa prefectural government. Please look at the right-hand figure. This shows a change in the financial transfer from Japan to Okinawa, and it's called Okinawa Promotion Budget. The navy blue part of the graph is the budget that Okinawa can decide how to spend. And the sky blue part is that Japanese can decide. According to the graph, as time passes, the ratio of navy blue is decreasing. That is, the discretion of Okinawa prefecture is relatively decreasing. On the other hand, simultaneously, Okinawa government attitude towards the United States-based problem is more aggressive than before. This means Japan has decreased the budget in order to suppress rebellion from Okinawa. Too many bases are bothering Okinawan people's lives and identity, but Japan is trying to ignore them by financial hard power.
Next, I'll talk about the cultural aspect of national bases in Japan. So there has been a lot of friendship fair occurred in a lot of bases in Japan, but many of them hasn't been reported by the media, so I'd like to present them. In Yokota bases, there have been friendship fair held, and then most of the Japanese people visit there. And also Iwakuni bases, they also hold the friendship festival, and then a lot of children were communicating with American people living there. And also there have been international fair happen in Husa bases, and it's getting so popular in most of the residents in Husa. And also there's a friendship day in Yokosuka bases, and it's also memorable for most of the people who live there. So we also need to look upon that there are many good points about having bases in Japan, because it leads to have the good communication between America and Japanese people.
However, the American side did not have the same level of active discussion on the national basis as their Japanese counterparts did have. According to Pew Research Center, a majority of Americans, especially young Americans, think it is more important to build economic ties with China than believe it is important to have such ties with Japan. Therefore, instead of focusing on the Japanese military development, most Americans feel it is more important to address the rise of China. Because the US diverts its attention from Japan, therefore, during our research, it was difficult for the American delegates to find information on how the US interpreted the current situation of Japanese national bases. Most of the sources were composed of the Japanese perspective, leaving out opinions on the American side. Thus, we predict that the US will know more about the US-China trade war than the national bases they have built in Japan. To not limit our prediction and discussion to our own RT group, we decided to create a survey and see how responses from JASC delegates might correlate with our difficulty in research from the American perspective. In our survey, there were a total of 4 questions. We first want to know the background of the delegates and then ask about how much they know about the controversy of American bases in Japan, how much they know about the US-China trade war, and what 3 countries they believe are the most influential in international relations. In total, from the JASC 72 conference, 34 participants answered all the questions. 14 are American delegates and 20 are Japanese delegates. Among the American delegates, 43% of people think US-China trade war is equally important to a national basis. 36% of people think US-China trade war is more important than the national basis. 21% of people think the trade war is less important than the national basis. These results show that though certain American individuals are more aware of the national basis, the majority of American delegates are leaning towards knowing more about the US-China trade war. However, in contrast, the Japanese delegates have 50% of people that know more about the national basis than the US-China trade war. Only 20% of people from the Japanese side are more aware of the US-China trade war than the basis, showing how there is an unequal attention on the national basis between the American delegates and the Japanese delegates. We can also observe how most Japanese delegates consider the US as the most important country for international relations. However, Japan has not been listed in the top 3 on the most influential in international relations, which therefore makes the US pay less attention to the US-Japan relations and national bases?
So the controversy of American bases in Japan is covered extensively in Japanese media and politics. It is virtually non-existent in American media and politics, which may be an explanation as to why there is a gap in understanding between Japanese and Americans. In fact, the majority of US politics and media is concerned not with international affairs, but with domestic affairs. The top 3 policies that were considered a priority were all domestic issues: the economy, healthcare costs, and education. Consequently, in a 2018 poll, 71% of Japanese people said that they do not believe the US considers Japanese interests. When the same poll was conducted in the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Australia, and South Korea, the majority of people in each country expressed that they do not believe the US considers their country's interests. This showcases the international consensus of American unilateralism. Unlike multilateralism, which is defined by cooperative action between states, unilateralism is an approach to international relations where a state acts without considering the interests of other states. Discussion of American unilateralism was prominent during Junior's presidency, where he unsigned or withdrew from the Kyoto Protocol's International Criminal Court and the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty. Examples of current American unilateralism are President Trump's withdrawal from the Trans-Pacific Partnership and America's withdrawal from the Paris Climate Accord because he believed it hurted American jobs. The concept of Trump's America's First policy has resulted in a revamp of a unilateralist approach to diplomacy. And just as Bush Jr.'s presidency, the effects of this approach are negative to the image of the president, as you can see in this chart. In addition to the declining confidence in the US president, the damages of this approach to foreign affairs has resulted in a decline in the trust of America amongst Japanese people.
We believe that the American bases in Japan provide an interesting lens to view the relationship between American hard power and Japanese individuals, as well as how hard power in Japan affects individuals. Besides American national bases, other US-Japan related issues also do not receive an equal amount of attention from both the Japanese and American side. However, though the majority of Americans seems to leave out Japan from the main discussion on international affairs, there are many individuals who still consider US-Japan related issues as equally important as the US-China relations. Therefore, the mainstream opinion represented by hard power does not cover all, but only captures an aspect of all the voices. We believe that it's important to assess that American worldview as well as the American approach to hard power as the United States influence reaches outside the confines of its borders and are crucial to the future of US-Japan relationship. So we've been presenting the aspect of hard power as an example of national bases. However, you guys might be wondering why we'd not touch on the individual aspect. But then looking back the process we have been researching about the national bases, we use survey asking individuals to answer your thought, and we also ask close friends about the experience that is related to the defenses, national defenses. This shows how hard power is related to individual, and the individual is also related to hard power. So this is our conclusion. Thank you so much for listening.
And this leads us to the third question and answer session. So I see that Ms. Ane Rodriguez has a question, if you would like to say it.
Yeah, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So my question is for the hard power T. I really appreciated Nelson's presentation. So my question is, how do you think nationalistic education poses a challenge to hard power initiatives and the balance between countries, specifically in Northeast Asia? An example could be in textbook production, for instance, that justifies military decisions in America. So for instance, dropping the atomic bomb is often taught to us as a justified decision for us, sort of becoming the moral compass of the world, and allowing for us to, get our hands into, the military bases in Japan, or for instance, historical omissions in more conservative textbooks in Japan. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for your question. I'm Katsura Pennington from New York University, and I agree that education has a lot to play with this mentality of American unilateralism as well as American exceptionalism. And I think that also plays to how the American media often concerns with only domestic issues and not really with international issues. So maybe in the future, I think those exchange opportunities, such as providing educational opportunities about learning about other cultures, as well as this conference as well, providing insight about both Japanese and American perspectives, allows for students and the future of America to realize that international affairs are closely related with American issues and how American attitudes to foreign diplomacy affects other cultures and countries.
Very much. Any further questions, please private message me or raise your hand as the video said. Mr. Shimamoto, I saw your hand raised.
Thank you. A very interesting theme again. I think the theme, you know, how you coined it is the hard power and individuals, and the relation between hard power versus individuals is again the role of the education that has been in the spotlight just right now. But when we talk about hard power, of course, we would again surmise that there's another word, soft power, right? And in case of soft power, then it will need, again, the role of the individuals for sure. And some of the American delegates have well mentioned this on the role of the bases in Japan, trying to set up events which will enhance cross-cultural communications. And that is one certain example of the soft power. So there could be several other examples other than the base per se. Individuals acting on their own, the NPOs or NGOs doing their own part. And I would recommend you to, you know, just dig into that part too. That is only my comment. If you have any counteractions, I would welcome.
Thank you so much for your comment on that. My name is Anna, and during our RT session, it was difficult for us to come up with a specific solution, and that's why we defined hard power as the enforcement of the different policies. But I think we can also dig into that and change that on the final forum. Thank you so much for your comments.
Thank you.
And yeah, to add to that, I think you talked a lot about the cultural aspect and opportunities for local Japanese people to interact with American servicemen and women. So I think those opportunities can further provide like soft power opportunities for more connections. And I think that can be looked further into the final forum as well.
Yeah, thanks to our EC, Rena-san was talking mostly about the soft power, so we could kind of compare the two aspects of the power, hard power, and then the soft power. So yeah, we should have talked about a lot about the soft power too, but we kind of focus more about the hard power. But we also, discuss a lot about the soft power and other power that has been said that is going to appear in these centuries. So thank you so much for coming. Thank you.
Unfortunately, our time is very limited, and I will have to stop there on the Q&A. Katsuda put in the Zoom group chat another Google form if you have specific questions for the hard power RT. And at this point, we will be going into our first break until 8:35 p.m. EDT or 9:35 a.m. JST. Those who are following us on YouTube Live, there's a link in the description for part 2 because this will not be streamed to you all. And those in the Zoom call, you will be seeing a slideshow from our great EC scooter.